What's up, Rovers? I'm back again. I'm just about to go traveling, so I'm super glad I was able to finish my Zhezhi guide first. She's our adorable new introvert that came in the first half of Wuwa's 1.2 update. Personally, I love her very much. She's very fluid and artistic. Her kit feels just as alive as her companion story, and if you haven't done it yet, I'd suggest doing so, as it's a treat. As always, all explanations and testing is backed by math, and my spreadsheets will be listed in description and pinned for cross-referencing. If this is your first time stumbling across my videos, let's outline how the video breakdown will go. First, we subdivide her role into two sections. Once for a TLDR and a deeper dive, then Forte leveling priorities, echo stats, main stats, and substats, and then her weapon choices and comparisons. We will wrap up benchmarks with some endgame stat goals and then look closer at her sequences and what they mean for the team. We then lead into her team options and rotations, including swap cancels, animation cancels, and comparisons. Then finally, an ending summary. Ready? Let's go. Zhezhi is a celebrated artist who has hidden her talent. On the battlefield, we can see how she brings her pieces to life to support her team with strong buffs, while also dealing good coordinated damage herself. She fills the exact same identical archetype as Yinlin, with smaller personality but flashier, vibrant animations, decent on-field and off-field damage with massive team outro buffs. She's quick swap and back swap friendly and does passable, but not recommended, damage if you really want to use her as a main DPS. Perhaps one of her lesser perceived values lies in how you can hit enemies from extremely far away and can instantly gap close with her skills too. Her kit can be broken down to two main parts. Your priority is casting your Liberation and Outro. This procs both her coordinated damage, which is about 35 to 40% of her total damage output, and grants the next Resonator Big Glacio and Skill Damage Deepen, which are final multipliers. To get to this point, you use a mixture of basic attacks to stack your Forte bar, then enhance skill cast to produce and consume teleport points while burning the bar to stack a bunch of buffs before swapping off. Yes, waving her brush around in rotations also deals a fair bit of damage, but this is a byproduct of setting up her Liberation and Outro, rather than a highlight. It looks very pretty though. Most of her later rotation can be animation or swap cancelled in some way or another. How this may be useful will be discussed later in the video. Now, as a sub-DPS buffer, Zhezhi's primary role is in how well she buffs the team, as she cannot bring enough damage herself to justify the team slot otherwise. As a result, her inherent skills are your highest priority to unlock, before building up anything else. Flourish grants the next Resonator 15 ult energy when Zhezhi outros, making rotation smoother and reducing ER requirements for investment, or even repurposing substat roles for DPS. On most units, this is worth about 12% ER, and this is also why it's extremely important to run her full rotation and outro. Her other inherent skill, Calligrapher's Touch, is a solid attack percent bonus that has near permanent uptime for her personal damage, including her coordinated DPS. Her Liberation is second priority, making up roughly 35 to 40% of her total damage output. Trying to get Zhezhi's outro going for inherent skill procs will indirectly always let you cast Liberation, as she produces a lot of energy herself, similar to Yinlin. It is considered coordinated damage, and one of the reasons why she's a perfect partner for Jinhsi, stacking incandescence quickly. Her Forte circuit is the third priority, making up roughly 25 to 30% of her total damage output. You always want to use her Forte circuit enhanced skilled anyways, because it also activates a lot of her self buffs. Her Resonant skill is your third priority. It does roughly equal or slightly lesser damage than her normal attack chain, but unlike her normal attacks, her unenhanced Resonant skill is required for all rotations. Basic attacks come in 4th and intro 5th for priorities. Okay, let's take a closer look at how her Forte circuit mechanics work. The enhanced skills from it produce quite a lot of Concerto, which is required to activate her outro quickly for a big buff benefits and free Liberation energy. The most interesting part of Zhezhi is her entire kit can be casted in the air, either directly, or an alternate variant of the moves will always be used, including her teleports and Liberation. The unique resource of her Forte is called Afflatus, and is built via basic attacks or intro skill. It has 3 bar segments, filling 30 Afflatus each. She cannot keep overcap Afflatus, so you want to use it as soon as it's full. One full basic attack string grants 50 Afflatus, split as 10, 15, and 25. Intro skill grants 45, therefore you can fill the entire bar with 2 basic chains, or more commonly an intro skill with basic chain, or a double intro rotation that I'll explain later. Now casting our base skill manifestation will produce left and right imprint icons if you have at least 60 Afflatus, consuming them. You can also produce a center imprint if you have at least 30 Afflatus and meet any of the requirements. Heavy by hold mouse 1 after basic 3, air heavy by holding mouse 1 anytime in air, counter heavy by holding mouse 1 after a dodge, or tapping mouse 1 after casting the base manifestation skill. That tapped after manifestation is your main way of quickly spawning 3 imprints. Essentially, build 90 Afflatus, tap skill to burn 60 and spawn left and right imprints, then tap mouse 1 to burn 30 and spawn center imprint. You can also spawn center imprint by a heavy holding mouse 1 after casting the Enhanced Stroke of Genius and Creation's Zenith skills, but you only do this if you screwed up. Once you have imprints existing on the field, preferably all 3, your resonance skill will be replaced by Shiny New Icon, which lets you cast Stroke of Genius. This will give you a lot of Concerto and Liberation energy, deal a high amount of damage, and also give you 1 Painter's Delight stack above your HP bar. This is all while teleporting to the closest tethered imprint and removing it. When you manage to build up 2 stacks of Painter's Delight from casting Stroke of Genius twice, your next enhanced teleport cast will be Creation Zenith instead. This is the exact same move, except it deals even higher damage and grants you plus 18% basic damage for 27 seconds. Yes, the only purpose of Painter's Delight is so you can activate this buff. Note that Stroke of Genius and Creation Zenith can be immediately swap cancelled at the start of cast, and they will continue their full animation. That's the whole mechanic of her Forte circuit. Zhezhi's Liberation Living Canvas is the bread and butter of her kit, contributing 35 to 40% of her total DPS. It casts a coordinated attack barrage similar to Yinlin's Forte circuit with some differences. It only hits 1 enemy at a time instead of Yinlin's multiple marks being hit at once, and also does slightly lower initial damage. However, remember that Zhezhi has better self buffs and team buffs. Hitting the enemy with any resonator, excluding echoes, will trigger 3 successive inklet hits at 1-second intervals. A maximum of 21 inklets can spawn at S0, and only 1 inklet can exist at once, excluding sequences. You cannot queue up inklet hits more than 1 second in advance, meaning you cannot hit 7 times quickly to stockpile all 21 hits. You need to hit at least once every 3 seconds, and this also means it takes a full 21 seconds for her to deal all her coordinated damage. Her default resonance skill manifestation is not that interesting. You can tap or hold it on ground and tap in air. There are no notable damage or frame data differences between the variants. It just twirls her big brush to deal damage, and if you have at least 60 Afflatus, doing this will spawn left and right imprints. Using a basic attack after this can spawn a center imprint if you still have 30 Afflatus remaining, and is the fastest way to get all 3 imprints on the field. The enhanced skills belong to her Forte circuit instead. Note that her base skill manifestation can be immediately swap cancelled just like her enhanced skills, Stroke of Genius and Creation Zenith. I would not advise doing this, because normally you want to basic attack after to spawn the 3rd imprint easily. As mentioned earlier, Zhezhi's normal attack tree is not important to her rotation outside of just building Afflatus for her. It's a 3-hit combo, generating 10, 15, and 25 Afflatus respectively. 2 full chains fill her Forte bar from 0. However, note that her intro skill grants 45, so you should always aim to intro skill onto her. There are even double intro rotations that will show later in the video, allowing you to completely skip her basic attacks. Note that her dodge counter grants 15 Afflatus and uses a faster version of her basic attack 2, before leading into basic attack 3. If you must absolutely double auto chain on her, a full chain plus dodge and finish chain also grants 90 Afflatus. The aerial moveset is not that useful, but note that any of her moves can be immediately animation cancelled into manifestation for imprints when you reach 90 Afflatus. This will burn 60 to produce left and right respectively. Interestingly, her heavy attack does not reset basic combo chain, but note that there isn't really reason to use it except as a backup tool to spawn middle imprint when you screw up. Zhezhi's intro skill is used to grant her 45 Afflatus and nothing more. It is quite important to get her intro skill, as her basic attack chain takes a while to cast and leaves her open to damage. While she can DPS from range, she is not a hybrid DPS like Changli, and her basic attacks also are the weakest part of her kit. It does grant more ultimate energy and is faster than a full basic chain, but grants less Concerto. Zhezhi's outro is useful in and of itself, but is also used to proc her inherent skill Flourish. This grants 15 liberation energy to the incoming resonator and is worth 12% ER on 125 ult cost units, saving at least 1 ER roll. This can make rotations easier at lower investment or even min-maxing for more DPS substats. The other default effect of her outro is extra 20 Glacio and 25 skill percent deepen, which is a final multiplier. Currently, the only units that can make best use of this are Lingyang and Sanhua. It is a massive boost to Sanhua's DPS, and while big for Lingyang, he still suffers from longer rotations and lower damage. I'm sure the Lingyang and enjoyers will appreciate Zhezhi, but note that this does not elevate Lingyang comps to the top, as only about 25 to 30% of his DPS is skill damage. It is still a significant damage increase, but the teams will feel a bit slow and still clunky. For Jinhsi, Zhezhi is roughly equal to Yinlin. Lower first rotation team damage since Zhezhi's own DPS is low but picks up in Tai's DPS charts later onwards. This frees up Yinlin for other comps. Other synergy units will be discussed in the team building section. Zhezhi's inherent skills are the reason why she's such a good support. The first grants her an essentially permanent 18% attack buff that only falls off when she's put back on field, lasting 27 seconds. It procs off Stroke of Genius and Creation Zenith, which is the mandatory enhanced skills of her Forte circuit. The other inherent skill is Flourish, which grants the next resonator plus 15 liberation energy if you outro. This makes rotations a lot more fluid, or safety nets, and it's worth 12% ER on a 125 cost unit. Again, this can be used to lower required investment or min-max for more DPS substats. Following the usual trend of 5-star units, Zhezhi's minor nodes are crit rate and attack percent. She gains 8% crit rate and 12% attack, making her quite simple to build. Now, echo stats are very straightforward. Basically, if you have some god tier DPS rolls, you can play on Freezing Frost with Lampylumen Myriad. Unfortunately, Lampylumen is the longest echo cast in the entire game, leaving you open to damage and grants questionable buffs. It also does not target enemies, making it not useful for mobile and distant enemies. For the average player, we want instead using Zhezhi as a sub DPS to buff our main DPS. This means we run Moonlit Clouds 99% of the time. Still not convinced? Here's my DPS charts comparing damage per rotation for each set on her, as well as damage per second. Moonlit Cloud sets are significantly faster and roughly 2 seconds or more shorter on a unit that already doesn't use that much field time, making it spike her damage per second a lot more. Glacio vs Moonlit set are basically equal for DPS, so the less time you spend on field, the better. Since Zhezhi is definitely not going to be the highest DPS unit on the team in a sub DPS setup. Less time she spends on field means more time weighted towards your main DPS. Don't worry, I'll discuss a Glacio set number crunching afterwards. Now, please note that I've stopped doing 4-4-1-1-1 math comparisons because I would assume by now we all know that 4-3-3-1-1 will do more damage. 4-4-1-1-1 is just a step to 4-3-3-1-1, and there is nothing wrong sticking to it. Generally, it is only a 5 to, at worst, a 10% DPS loss when used as element main stats on the 3 cost for good rolls on both setups versus 4-4-1-1-1. On Zhezhi, 4-4-1-1-1 Moonlit versus 4-3-3-1-1 Moonlit is less than 5% damage loss. For comparison, missing a single DPS substat on just one single echo on your entire loadout is worth about 3 to 4% overall damage missing, which means 4-4-1-1-1 Moonlit is perfectly okay on Zhezhi, so don't sweat it. Bonus points for not needing to farm Glacio percent on 4-4-1-1-1 and being useful for all future supports. This also means anything you see on this chart comparing 4-3-3-1-1 Moonlit versus Glacio set, anything at 95% or better is pretty much indistinguishable, and anything 90% plus can easily close the gap by just playing a bit better. And remember, whatever you see as 4-3-3-1-1 is less than 5% worse if you replaced it with 4-4-1-1-1. Now, for her energy requirements, 115 to 125 is more than enough. She generates a lot of liberation energy herself, and the bigger question is usually filling her concerto bar instead. Because Moonlight grants plus 10% ER already and even more liberation energy if you're using Heron, you only really need a single ER roll, or at most 2 in substats. You do not need ER main stats at all for your 3-cost echoes. This makes Zhezhi extremely simple to build as a support. All your other stats go into crits or attack percent. Attack flat is also good, and in this case equal to basic percent on Zhezhi, because her damage profile consists of 70 to 75% basic damage on non-signature and 75 to 80% on signature. Do not use an ER weapon on her, it is a massive waste of DPS. It's not like she literally does 0 damage like Verena or Baijer. Cosmic Ripples is okay because it is still primarily a DPS weapon with big attack percent and even basic percent with bonus ER on the side. Now let's talk quickly about the Glacio set on Zhezhi. I would not advise doing this unless you just really like seeing her on field and want to play her element theme. Not only do you need to roll 1 extra ER substat, but the return on investment is poor, unless you're pre-farming for a future limited Glacio DPS or waiting for a Glacio summon 4 costs like Jue. The overall damage per second of Glacio vs Moonlit is basically equal. To make things worse, the Glacio set grants Glacio percent, which dilutes her signature weapon and Cosmic Ripple's basic percent. Pulling her signature results in a bigger damage spike on Moonlit versus Glacio as a result. For TLDR, always go with Moonlit Clouds on Zhezhi unless you have some unholy god tier Glacio set rolls, or just really love seeing her on screen as main DPS and play thematically. Moonlit has literally equal damage per second to Glacio's set for her and doesn't dilute her signature's basic percent buffs like Glacio. You don't need to worry about sequences as they do not alter your desired stat splits and substats in a meaningful way that requires refarming. On top of having equal DPS, it also buffs your next Resonator by a fair margin on Moonlit, further boosting overall team damage. 44111 Moonlit is only about 5% behind 43311 Moonlit and is near indistinguishable with her signature, making up the missing Glacio percent with basic percent. Her weapon choices depend on whether you're looking through the lens of Moonlit set or Glacio set. This is important to note because her best weapons all give a kind of resonance percent, this time basic percent. Basic percent is in the same stat line as Glacio percent, meaning Glacio set heavily dilutes the value of her best weapons. This is a forewarning on why the 2 next charts look so different at the top. The gray tinted ones represent the notable R1 5-star weapons. Note that her desired set is Moonlit, both because it has equal or better DPS than Glacio, but it also brings buffs to the team, whereas Glacio's set doesn't and is selfish. Her R1 signature is only 112% scaling and R1 String Master being 107% scaling of R1 Cosmic Ripples on the Glacio set, despite them having roughly similar damage, letting you see the Glacio percent dilution effect. On Moonlit set, the 5-star weapons make a much bigger impact, charting 118% scaling on her R1 signature and 111% on R1 String Master, compared to R1 Cosmic Ripples. The TLDR is if you already have String Master, you do not need her signature. You don't even really need her signature if you have Cosmic Ripples because she actually makes good use of its basic percent passive, and free ER to not need any ER rolls whatsoever. However, note that String Master is literally the exact same weapon as Sprouts, with the same attack stat archetype and inverted crit stats, and granting attack percent on skill rather than basic percent on skill. The 7% gap isn't that noticeable, and it's really just because, well, the basic percent actually applies to her. The fact that her signature, which grants massive basic percent, is only 18% better than Cosmic Ripples, when she deals 75 to 80% basic damage on her profile, speaks volumes about how good Cosmic Ripples passive already is for her. For non-5 stars, Augment is best as a generic crit stit generating massive stats and sizable attack percent. Like all Battle Pass weapons, it syntonizes very well, going up to plus 48% attack of rank 5. The only other purple rectifier worth using is Jinhsi Keeper. Strangely, we don't have 2 good non-Battle Pass DPS rectifiers as 4 stars, like other weapon archetypes. For blue rectifiers, Guardian is better than Rectifier of the Night, and this is for 2 reasons. 1, Zhezhi deals about 70 to 75% basic damage on this weapon, and it buffs basic damage percent. And 2, Rectifier of Night only buffs for 15 seconds after intro, whereas Zhezhi has off-field damage for up to 27 seconds, whereas Guardian Rectifier's basic percent buff is permanently active. Do not use an ER main stat weapon, you are killing her DPS. Now, if you manage to achieve all that we've discussed so far, then her endgame substats should look a little bit like this. Do keep in mind these are scaled to level 90 with maxed out Forte, so it can take some time to reach this. Keep in mind she has one of the lowest attack stats in the game for a sub DPS and instead relies on self buffs to reach her final damage. To close out Zhezhi's kit analysis before teams, let's look at her sequences. If you want deeper detail, please check out my spreadsheets, as I have a tab specifically for calculating the effects of each sequence and how it impacts her kit. All math was done assuming R1 rhymed draped sprouts. Note that all values are quoted in vacuum and will be somewhat diluted in full team comp rotations. Expect roughly 3/4 of the listed values scaling when accounting for buffs from the rest of your team. Her S1 is a simple crit buff, and it isn't enough to change how you distribute substats even if you use String Master, unlike Changli's plus 25% crit rate situation. The 15 Resonance Energy is worth about 12% ER, lowering her to needing only 1 ER roll on Glacio set or 0 on Moonlit. Now, if you're using Cosmic Ripples, you'll even have extra ER as a cushion. This is an 8% damage increase overall. Her S2 increases her Liberation Inklet cap from 21 to 27, meaning now it takes the full 27 seconds to deal its damage versus 21, but it also contributes more damage overall. Not much to say, just free damage. This is a 13% damage increase over S1. S2 Zhezhi is 1.22 times as strong as S0. Her S3 essentially gives her a near permanent plus 45% attack buff from casting any version of her skills. This sounds big, but recall that she already grants herself plus 18% attack. This buff is slightly diluted and increases her damage by 14% over S2. S3 Zhezhi is 1.4 times as strong as S0. Her S4 is the standard plus 20% attack buff to entire team for 30 seconds on casting Liberation, essentially 100% uptime. While it's only a 6.7% overall buff to herself, consider its impact on your entire team. S4 Zhezhi is 1.49 times as strong as S0. S5 adds an extra simultaneous inklet on every third inklet your Liberation spawns, dealing 140% scaling of a normal inklet. Important to note, this does not count towards your 27 inklet cap. It is a straight big damage upgrade, contributing to 23.8% more damage over her S4. S5 Zhezhi is 1.84 times as strong as S0. Her S6 adds 1 extra Ivory Herald during your teleport casts, Stroke of Genius, or Creation's Zenith. Those are your enhanced skills. It deals 120% of your Stroke of Genius damage and is a rather big damage buff, since you cast these 3 times per rotation, resulting in 22% more damage than her S5. S6 Zhezhi is 2.25 times as strong as S0. Let's look at Zhezhi's rotations next. Don't worry, they aren't as crazy as Changli's. There are 4 main rotations, for one of which is very popular and I actually advise against. There are only 2 I recommend using. Animation and swap cancels are identical for each and mainly only differ by how you handle her Afflatus building, or whether you're on Glacio or Moonlit set. Moves that can be backswapped with 0 or almost 0 time loss are noted with a caret notation. Animation cancel moves are instead noted with an asterisk. As a reminder, Zhezhi's rotation flow focuses on producing 3 full Afflatus bars as quickly as possible, so she can cast her enhanced skills to produce big Concerto energy as swap off with her outro. Liberation energy is a byproduct of this, and her Liberation should always be casted first whenever possible. Let's take a look at why. This is one of the most popular Zhezhi rotations, leading with intro, then basic 3 times, then normal skill for 2 imprints, then quick tap heavy to spawn your 3rd imprint, then spam enhanced skill until you burn all teleports and alt to swap off. There's a very big issue with this rotation. First, of course, is Glacio set Lampylumen that I don't need to re-explain, but the Liberation cast should be at the start, not the end. If you're playing Glacio set, there is a massive end lag to the 3rd hit of Lampylumen, which is cancelled by dodge before basic attacking. However, this is slower than dodge cancel immediately interrupted by Liberation, as the dodge begins since her ult has time stop. Luckily, swap cancelling does not remove in-flight birds, which is why you should always Liberation at the top of Zhezhi's rotation, instead of at the bottom. You might think this is a DPS loss, but actually because of where her buffs come into play, casting ult at the start results in identical damage per rotation as at the end. And because the rotation is actually shorter time-wise, then it leads to higher DPS. Therefore, if you're playing Glacio set, use this rotation variant that uses her Liberation at the beginning. Now, for Moonlit set, you still want to cast Liberation at the start because it allows you to swap cancel Creation Zenith, saving roughly half to 1 full second. You still do the standard basic chain, then normal skill for 2 imprints, then enhanced basic, then 3 times enhanced skill plus Heron cancel. To do this, you can either dodge cancel Creation Zenith into Impermanence Heron to save half a second, or you can cast Impermanence Heron anytime earlier in a rotation and swap cancel. Now, here's one final 4th alternate crazy Moonlit rotation that builds on what we just spoke about. This lets you set up buffs or cast Bell on other units again like Verena who don't need to be intro to do their job, or even to just not put yourself in the air with Heron. Note that swapping into Verena like this puts her into basic 3 already, making it easy to continue to basic 5 to give her 1 Forte bar back. Doing this puts Heron on cooldown but still grants the, on outro, grant attack percent to next resonator effect to judge her passively. You can then switch back to her, finish casting your teleports to fill up her concerto, and immediately swap cancel Creation Zenith to outro and activate the Heron's attack buff on your actual DPS unit. If you manage to charge Verena's concerto bar fully or whoever your non-DPS unit is, this results in a double intro rotation to judge her, completely skipping the need for her to actually run her basic attack chain before casting skills. This double intro rotation would preferably directly outro from DPS to Judger, then swap cancel to Verena, then once she's done her rotation, outro back into Judger. It is harder to pull off on other units since Verena is one of the few that can charge Concerto so fast and doesn't need intro to do so. Let's talk about Judger's team options next. As she is a sub-DPS buffer, we will be primarily looking at compatible DPS units. Unless otherwise specified, the third team member is assumed to be Verena. She can be substituted with Baizhi, but will result in slower rotations and less damage. I will also assume those skilled enough can run a glass cannon non-Verena comp as well, since I still believe Verena is best suited to Encore and Changli comps, due to their inability to iframe spam, kite, group, crowd control, or zone away from enemies like Jinhsi, Jian, Sanhua, Donjin, or even Lingyang. I've listed the tiering of most commonly used judger teams on screen to sum things up quickly for those curious. No, I do not have complete maths for these, but if you cross references with other theory crafters, I'm pretty confident they'll agree. Most units with fast skill casts can squeeze in back swaps during Judger's Stroke of Genius casts because their enhanced skills run their full animation, even when she's swapped off. Because Judger's personal damage is relevant off field, she can in theory be put in any team. Now, the first obvious choice to look at is Jinhsi, the elephant in the room with the highest damage in the game, with 80% of her DPS coming from skilled damage. Jinhsi is not a quick swap compatible character, so you would just run the rotations like normal. Make sure you intro onto Jinhsi, cast enhanced skill immediately, then spam basic skills until you can Dragon Puke and swap off. The usual 120 ER on Jinhsi is already enough to get the job done. Now, is Judger better than Yinlin at this job? Yes and no. Judger offers lower first rotation damage because she does not have the raw upfront DPS that Yinlin has. Yinlin essentially has less coordinated damage hit count, but more on-field damage. And while Yinlin does deal slightly more coordinated damage per hit, it still only lasts 18 seconds. Yinlin can also run her rotation slightly faster than Judger, and can also tag multiple enemies at once for coordinated damage. However, whereas Yinlin's outro is near useless for Jinhsi, Judger's outro boosts Jinhsi's skill damage to match or ever so slightly surpass Yinlin's setups on the second rotation onwards. Yinlin also cannot take advantage of double intro to fully charge her Forte bar like Judger can to speed up rotations and reduce likelihood of interruption. More importantly, using Judger with Jinhsi frees up Yinlin for Zhengli Yao, who's an upcoming Electro Gauntlet user that scales with Liberation damage percent, which is exactly the 2 stats Yinlin's outro buffs. Yes, he's literally Calchero's kit, but better. More damage, more rotation freedom, more forgiveness on ult windows, better gap closer moves, faster concerto generation, faster ult energy generation. Expect an early video from me this time around about him, as I started working on his video already. Now, yes, it is possible to use both Judger and Yinlin on the same team. Yes, it results in extremely high damage and is very flashy and super quick swap friendly, since Yinlin can swap anytime her skill isn't active, and Judger can swap during any cast of Stroke of Genius, Creation Zenith, and Impermanence Heron. Yinlin would run 120% ER only, as Zhezhi produces a ton of liberation energy. I would not recommend doing this, as it's overkill and these units are better used split up on 2 separate teams. Also, their outros compete with each other since they can only activate on the very next Resonator. This only makes sense for Jinhsi comps to double dip on coordinated damage, but Jinhsi comps deal higher damage with Verena, and Yuanwu comps are not that far behind. An invested Yuanwu Jinhsi is only 5 to 10% worse than using Yinlin, and uninvested is 15% worse on team performance. Alternatively, you could run Yinlin Zhezhi on a future Zhengli Yao comp, but I still wouldn't recommend this, as Zhengli Yao is Electro with Liberation % scaling, neither of which Zhezhi buffs. There are better units to bring to that comp than just a second source of coordinated damage. Even Yang Yang's grouping gives bigger value to take advantage of Yao's cleave hitboxes and building Concerto quickly. Changli is actually an interesting one. She scales quite well with Zhezhi and is the third best team comp for Zhezhi that is only beaten by an invested Yuanwu for Jinhsi and Zhezhi. Changli deals 55 to 60% skill damage on her profile and can run her entire rotation in about 14 seconds with tons of room for quick swapping. Changli only needs 120 ER in this kind of team, again, as Zhezhi produces a ton of liberation energy. The optimal way to play this setup is to actually rotate Zhezhi's outro first into Changli to benefit from the skill damage deepen buff. You would swap off after Zhezhi's liberation to cast Changli's True Sight, Capture, the flashy AoE screen move, then immediately swap back to Zhezhi because it deals all hits regardless. Then double swap to Slam Down for 30 Afflatus and remove Changli's swap cooldown. Then Heron cancel, back onto Changli to Blink Stab and build your first Inflamed stack. Cast True Sight a second time and swap back to Zhezhi and double Aerial to Slam Down again, plus 30 to finish your Afflatus bar. Cast Manifestation and Basic to Conjuration cancel. Then during any of your Stroke of Genius casts, backswap to Changli one more time to Blink Stab and build your second Inflamed stack. Finish the Stroke of Genius and Creation Zenith teleports, then outro for the 25% skill damage deepen onto Changli, and immediately Phoenix to gain your third Inflamed stack. And you just have to continue the ground combo to get our fourth stack. If you grapple tech, you can even get 2 times Phoenixes on intro to immediately get your 4th stack in Flaming Sacrifice. Cast Liberation and Flaming Sacrifice and swap off early. Do note that Changli Zhezhi Verena is still weaker than Changli Encore Verena, because Changli buffs Encore perfectly, and Encore is also able to backswap inside of Changli's rotation to save time. Encore also does more damage than Changli herself. Next, Sanhua deals a considerable amount of skill damage. Its Glacio element charges Concerto quickly and can time stop and freeze enemies, is easy to use outside of timing your Concerto bar rhythm minigame, and is free to everyone. She has featured on many banners and has extremely good DPS sequences that both spike her DPS and make building her easier, for what is traditionally considered a sub-DPS. Sanhua has always been a good pocket choice for quick, reliable damage and easy intro-outro. Unfortunately, I will admit I have not had the time nor the resources to invest into Sanhua for this video, and I would honestly recommend checking out Megi's Zhezhi video for this topic, as there is also some exclusive Sanhua related tech to be found there. I'm really sorry. The TLDR I'm aware of is her ultimate and skill spawns a good chunk of ice in front of her, letting her rhythm game Forte bar in the blue detonates all ice on field for DPS and massive amounts of Concerto and Liberation energy. All ice blocks detonated are considered Glacio skill damage, fully benefiting from Zhezhi's outro. The range of this small blue bar is extended via basic 5, intro, resonant skill, and liberation. This combined with her just 100 liberation costs on a 16 seconds cooldown is what makes her so speedy, and applying DPS and having alt uptime as a viable main DPS. Just note that her rotations are super fast and take practice. Yuanwu is only ever used with Zhezhi in Jinhsi comps and is the budget option when you can't run Verena Yinlin. He can be used even at level 1 and does not really need a rotation beyond just putting down his pillar. This makes the Jinhsi Yuanwu comp weaker than Sanhua Verena DPS and Changli Verena DPS. However, if your Yuanwu is invested, it will pass both of them. This is noticeably less damage than Jinhsi Verena or Jinhsi Yinlin. An invested Yuanwu does not need to actually DPS and again can just place his totem. If you want to actually use him, intro onto him in Echo, then cast Totem and Liberation to go Lightning Infused and blow up the Totem for big damage. Yuanwu rotation is not swap friendly, so you just stay on him spamming normals, then heavy, then enhance basic and loop. Now, you could also just cancel this immediately after his ult and swap off to replace his Totem. I would not advise running his full rotation for the time being, as staying on him after casting his ult is a team DPS loss, unless you're trying to finish a shield break meter, or nearly full concerto already for intro-outro. He's waiting for a defense scaling fur cost echo perk buff and a defense flat main stats instead of attack flat we normally have on 3 cost and 1 cost elites, and also a proper defense percent gauntlet. All of this before I'd recommend using him as an off-rotation DPS. Note that you don't even have to do any of this, and placing his totem alone is enough because it deals significantly more damage when his Forte bar is full and unused. Now for Lingyang, this one is pretty obvious. Lingyang is our only actual Glacio main DPS at the moment. Note that his damage is somewhat underwhelming as a main DPS and has high field time requirements, roughly 15 seconds on average with the awkward aerial combat. However, he can be incredibly fun and most of the time can dodge attacks freely. He also benefits notably from Zhezhi's outro. I don't actually own Lingyang, so I cannot offer proper advice on him, but Zhezhi elevates him to a decent status capable of comfortably clearing tower and holograms at high investment. Note that only about 25 to 30% of his DPS profile is skill damage though. Finally, at the end of the list, we basically have everyone else. Because Zhezhi is a sub-DPS buffer, she can fit in almost any team. This means you can even play her with Havoc Rover, despite having no synergy just for the coordinated damage, or even Spectral Rover, who is 45% skill damage, but has lower damage. The TLDR is that Zhezhi only has a few optimal partners, but can be used anywhere. Thank you so much for watching through this entire video. I hope the information has been useful to help you decide on whether to pull, or how to build or play Zhezhi. As a reminder, all spreadsheets documenting my testing can be found in the description and pinned comment. Do feel free to make a copy if you want to change values and test stuff. Cheers! If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or, better yet, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Stick around if you want to see interesting videos. Don't miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching and see you all next time.